And a pleasant good evening to everyone. Welcome to the Author Showcase. I am Keith Williams, your host. Hope everybody's having a great weekend so far. And this year, just like last year, we're bringing you the best of authors, bloggers, influencers, publishers, and now we're bringing on musicians. They are being showcased right here on the Author Showcase. And so today we have a published author with us today. Her name is Patricia Newman. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Keith. I'm thrilled to be here.
So tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Wow, in a nutshell, right? I am a children's book author. I've been working at writing children's books for, gosh, many years now. I focus mostly on environmental or social justice issues. When I speak with children at school, I usually say I write about the things that make me angry. And they always get a big laugh about that. But it's kind of true. I write about things that bother me. I want to fix them. I'm not sure how to fix them myself. So I research them and I write about them. And I'm inspired, I guess, by people who are out there in the field working on environmental issues or social justice issues. And I feel hopeful after I've done the research and the writing and created a book.
That's very intriguing that you mentioned dealing with environmental justice and social justice. How would you put that in a book in which children would be able to understand what the
Well,
topic?
there's the $20,000 question, isn't it? For example, my newest book, A River's Gifts, is subtitled The Mighty Elwha River Reborn. The Elwha River is in the Pacific Northwest in the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. And it has been the source of life for millennia, for not only the ecosystem, the forest, the trees, the salmon and other fish that live in the river, but also of a local tribe called the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe. They call themselves the Strong People, and that's what I call them in the book. But the river was dammed about 100 or so years ago now, and the ecosystem began to die because when the dams were built, no fish passage was built to allow the salmon to swim upstream and spawn. So as you can imagine, the salmon fishery just petered out, and with it, the Strong People's way of life, animals like bears and other big, large birds like eagles that ate salmon that were coming upstream to spawn, left the area to find some feeding grounds that were more productive, and the ecosystem began to change. And then something happened. The Olympic National Park had expanded, and it sort of swallowed up one of the two dams on this river. And so the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission could no longer renew the license for that dam. The two dams on the river were sort of old, outdated, not much of the power, not much of the electricity that had been generated was now being generated by these dams. The city had grown. They were using other newer dams. So the time was ripe to take them down. And that's exactly what happened. The effort was led by the Strong People, Olympic National Park, government officials, just concerned citizens. The dams came down, and it was something like 3 days later, somebody noticed the first Chinook salmon swimming up above the dams that used to be for the first time in 100 years. It was miraculous, really. And the ecosystem is beginning to recover. It's such a happy conservation story. And it's an environmental justice story because the Strong People, the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe, now have the beginnings of their way of life back.
And I just want to throw some accolades to the audience, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
And you wrote more than one book. So these are these are nonfiction books for children that has been welcomed in classrooms and libraries across the country. Considered one of the best nonfiction authors writing for students in today's market, her new release, A River's Gift, received starred reviews in the Kirkus and Book List, and a Kirkus Reviews Best Picture Book of 2011.
It's
Additional,
actually 2022.
it's 2022, not
Yeah,
2000.
yeah. I think the
Okay.
2011 was a typo that I made when I wrote that.
Oh, that's good. Her other accolades and distinguished titles, including Planet Ocean, Sea Otter Heroes, Zoo Scientists to the Rescue, Centers for Children's Literature Best Book of the Year. Do you know what year that was?
Sea Otter Heroes, I think, was 2018, but now you're testing me. I'm not 100% sure.
Then we have Plastic Ahoy,
Plastic Ahoy,
uh,
right?
yeah, which is the Green Earth Book Award.
Hmm.
Subaru Science Books and Film Prize finalists. And then Nima's Reason to Smile was a Parent's Choice recommended book. Uh, so yes, when you think of some of the names of these books, it automatically rings environmental in my mind.
Right.
You mentioned one of the books, so um, give us some details of some of the other books.
Okay. Let's see. Do you have a particular one you'd like to hear about, or should I just choose?
Um, well, I'd like to go through all of them.
You'd like to go through all of them. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've written a book called Planet Ocean with Annie Crawley, who is a Women's Hall of Fame diver and a filmmaker and photographer. So the photos in Planet Ocean are stunning, absolutely stunning. But you know, Keith, there are a lot of ocean books for kids, and we wanted to make a different kind of ocean book. We wanted to write a book that shows kids how we are connected to the sea, how it provides the air we breathe and some medicines that people need to take, how it creates our weather, how it makes global trade possible. So we focused on 3 areas of the ocean: the Coral Triangle, where huge coral reefs grow, and of course a coral reef attracts tens of thousands of different species. We focused on the Salish Sea in the Pacific Northwest, and we focused on the Arctic. We interviewed all kinds of scientists, business people, artists, kids involved in various projects. And we showed how we are connected to the sea. There's a lot of science in that book too. Ocean acidification is explained, the chemistry behind ocean acidification, why our carbon pollution in our atmosphere is also polluting the ocean. We go through some of the chemistry there. But one thing that we do that I think is different than many books on the market is that for each region that we visit, the Coral Triangle, the Salish Sea, and the Arctic, we have 2 QR codes that kids can scan with a device, and those QR codes lead to videos, which bring students below the surface of the ocean with Annie. So you can see a turtle swimming around with a piece of plastic fishing line hanging out of its butt. And you can see the Arctic, underwater in the Arctic. And you can see underwater in the Salish Sea. In these videos, you will see children diving with Annie. She has a dive program for young people. And we're hoping that we make the sea not only more accessible, but we make it more a part of kids' lives through the text, the images in the book, and the videos themselves.
And how do you make science easier for children to understand?
Well, first I have to understand it. And I think I always sort of think of myself as a fourth grader. You know, I remember myself best as a fourth grader. And I always think, well, how would you have understood this? And I just break it down little by little by little. So, for instance, we decided that climate change really begins with the excess carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. So we thought, well, kids understand pollution. Let's just call it carbon pollution. That's essentially what climate change is. It's too much carbon in our atmosphere. And for the ocean, it changes the chemistry of the ocean. And everything living in the ocean needs water at a certain level of acidity. But when we add more carbon and we keep adding more carbon and more and more and more, it changes the acidity of the ocean. So, for instance, corals can't make those bony skeletons very successfully. And clams and scallops that we eat on our dinner plates can't successfully make their shells. And fish like salmon, who need to find their way home to spawn, get confused in a more acidic ocean. So these are ways that we show kids, if the chemistry of the ocean is changing and all of these things that we depend on for food are being affected, then it's going to affect what's on our dinner plate as well. And when I visit schools, I always do experiments. I have an ocean acidification experiment that I do. I have kids hold their breath and explain to them that what's happening, why they feel woozy, is not that they, it's not from a lack of oxygen, but it's because the acid is building up in their system and there's no way to release it. That's how we release acid, is by exhaling, breathing out that carbon dioxide. But by keeping it in, our body's building up acid. And that's exactly what's happening in the ocean. And it only takes a little bit to affect marine life. So I just try to break down the science into little pieces that children can understand, and then build on those pieces until we get the whole concept.
And I'm kind of surprised that these type of books still exist, considering that we're in a time in which the subject of science and climate change has been so heavily politicized that we're come to a point to where certain books are either being banned, or they're about to be banned, or they're banned already. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel fortunate that I have found a publisher. It's an imprint called Millbrook Press with Lerner Publishing Group, who believes in science, who I have an editor who adores science. And every time I bring her a new book about something cool happening in the environment, she just is very excited to publish it. So first of all, you need people out there who are people who believe in science, I guess. And I hate to use the word believe, because science is a very rigorous step-by-step process where when a study is published, for instance, that says carbon dioxide is the leading cause of climate change, that study has been, the results have been gathered carefully. The statistics have been run carefully. It has been reviewed by peers in the field who understand the science intimately, and the conclusions are drawn carefully and thoughtfully. And for somebody to say, I don't believe in climate change, I kind of counter with a different argument. I say, well, do you have a cell phone? And they'll usually say yes. Most people these days have cell phones, right? And I'll say, well, so you believe in that science, right? And then I'll say, well, do you drive a car? And they go, yeah, I drive a car. And I said, well, you believe in that science, right? To keep you safe, the seat belts, the engines, the whatever, to keep you safe. And they say, yeah. And I say, and you go to the doctor, right? And you have taken, maybe you're on a prescription medication, or maybe you've been sick and the doctor has given you medication to help cure you, and you believe in that science, right? And they'll usually say, yeah. And so I just counter with, well, why not climate science? Nearly 100%, it's like 95, 97% of the scientists in the world have confirmed climate change and the fact that the world is warming, and the fact that it's from human habits. So why are we not believing them? That's a big question in my mind.
So at what age do these books particularly targeted? We know that in certain grades that kids are being taught science, probably, I guess, starting like maybe the second or third grade or something like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think actually many teachers introduce science even at the kindergarten level. It might not be experimental science as we as adults know it, but it could have something to do with coding, or it could have something to do with logical thinking, or it could have something to do with observation. Those are all skills that scientists need that can be taught as young as kindergarten, or even before. But I think generally science is taught as a subject in the first, second grade classrooms. My books generally are written for ages 8 to 12. So that would cover something like third grade through middle school for most children. But I have had teachers tell me that they've introduced sea otter heroes, for instance, to children as young as first and second grade, because every child in America knows what a sea otter is. If you ask them to list 5 things about a sea otter, they will have no trouble with it. They're cute, fuzzy, relatable animals that kids instantly love. So there are some parts of sea otter heroes that young kids are learning about. They might not be reading the book, the entire book, but they're reading sections of it with a teacher who's really interested in it.
So who are the sea otter heroes?
Well, the sea otters themselves are the heroes. That book is about not only sea otters, but a scientist by the name of Brent Hughes, who really was interested in the seagrass ecosystems. Seagrass is an aquatic plant that grows in an intertidal area, the place near shore where the tides go out and you see the grass, and then the tides come in and they're submerged again. It's kind of like a place where you might find a tide pool. So he was interested in that area, in this one particular spot in Northern California called the Elkhorn Slough, which is off Monterey Bay. And the Elkhorn Slough is in the middle of the Salinas Valley. And if you don't know California very well, the Salinas Valley is America's vegetable bowl. It's where most of your vegetables are grown. Carrots, cauliflower, broccoli, peppers, tomatoes, you name it, lettuces. And because of all the fertilizer on the fields, there's a lot of fertilizer that is run off into the creeks and rivers that drain into the Elkhorn Slough. And what happened is fertilizers usually cause algae to grow. And when a lot of algae grow on seagrass, it dies. But the seagrass in the Elkhorn Slough was vibrant and green and healthy and spreading. It was lush, it was thriving. And it didn't make sense to Brent. Why was this happening? So he did all kinds of experiments and tried and failed and tried and failed and tried and failed again. And somebody finally suggested that he look at some sea otter data that the captain of a tour boat had been collecting for 20 years. And he discovered that there was a correlation. The more sea otters in the area, the healthier the seagrass. So he actually put experiments together, scientific experiments together to prove whether or not that was true. And it was absolutely true. He discovered what was called a trophic cascade, meaning that the predator, the sea otters are carnivores. And in the slough, they were the top predator. It's too small to fit whales and sharks and things like that. So sea otters were the top predator in the Elkhorn Slough. And they were the reason that the grass was so healthy, because there's this whole relationship. Sea otters eat crabs, and the crabs eat these little slugs that kind of vacuum all the algae off the seagrass. So what was happening was, without sea otters, the crabs were proliferating, and they were killing all the little slugs that were eating the algae off the seagrass. So the seagrass was dying. But you introduce otters and they keep the crab population under control. So the slugs stay numerous enough to do their job and vacuum the seagrass and keep it healthy. And this Brent Hughes discovered this relationship, and it was miraculous. It was something we never knew before. And that's one of the things I love about science, is finding out things that we never, ever knew before. And we didn't even know we didn't know them.
You also spend some time teaching as well. So would you say that when you wrote these books, the teacher side of you probably came out, or was it the activist side of you that came
Oh,
out, or was
yeah.
it a combination thereof?
It was definitely the activist side. The teacher side comes out when I'm presenting to kids. But when I write, or when I consider an idea for the book, the part that comes out is that fourth grader that's in me, that says, would you have been interested in this as a kid? And that's the side that I use to write the books. I put the teacher side away. That sometimes the teacher side gets a little too didactic. I want to make it exciting and fresh and new and relatable, and as well as understandable to children.
That's very interesting, because I think the way that teachers teach is probably different than what it was when I was a kid. Uh, we we were just glad, we were just glad to be there to interact with people and learn new things. And now these days, I believe teachers have to be more creative in kind of getting their attention, because you and I both know, and I hope I'm right, that it takes a lot more work to get a kid's attention than it is and trying to get an adult's attention. And so would you say that picture books has a way of doing that, grasping a kid's attention, a child's attention?
I think they do. I think there's been a lot of research that shows kids love nonfiction, but adults are usually, if you have a child that that's a reluctant reader, and maybe you're sort of introducing fiction. Well, here, read this book. I love this book as a child. Or read this one's really popular. Or the kid next door loves this series. But if they're all fiction, they might not grab that child's attention because that child craves nonfiction, craves facts, craves stories about nonfiction. So nonfiction is really becoming hugely popular in schools. In fact, the National Council for Teachers of English just wrote a position statement on the wonders of nonfiction and how it can successfully be used in the classroom to help children practice literacy skills, to help teach writing, to engage them in other content areas like science and social studies and current events. And I've had people in my educator programs from high school and colleges who will often use children's picture books just to introduce a topic and then get into the nitty gritty, the details at whatever level the kids are, whether they're in middle school, high school, college level later on. But it's the children's book that is capturing attention and kind of bringing out the wonder of whatever the nonfiction topic is. So people then can build on that wonder with their own questions and their own sense of inquiry.
I mean, I was almost kind of like a hybrid. Like, when it comes to nonfiction and facts and current events, um, I was introduced to those in several ways when I was in grade school. For example, of course, the picture book, and then we had like TV show, Sesame Street,
Mm-hmm.
Schoolhouse Rock, and things of that nature. Yeah, back in the past, I had one kid asked me, "Well, how do you memorize the preamble to the Constitution?"
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Schoolhouse Rock." That's how I learned how to recite the preamble to the Constitution, by
Mm-hmm.
watching Schoolhouse Rock.
Mm-hmm.
I learned the basics of the federal government, how a bill is passed, all through those animated, sessions. But just picking up a book and just reading it didn't really grasp my attention. I was more into kind of fiction story, more than anything else.
Right.
And
And a lot of
and I got that
people still are, but there
and
are
I get that from books.
tons of kids who prefer nonfiction. And I think we need to honor that.
Yes, absolutely. If that's what's going to grab their attention
Mm-hmm.
and get them interested in learning, of course, I would definitely embrace that. But again, as a kid, I was pretty much a hybrid,
Right.
a little bit of both. And so that's what got me interested in, watching movies. So I became an action junkie. I wanted the thrill of the chase, the excitement. That's what got my attention. But I always found those nuggets in there, about some fact or some subject. And so a combination of all that pretty much would guide my learning. And so in dealing with that, we also had to deal with the various learning styles as well. So how
Absolutely.
so how does your book cater to children that they may learn by doing, or they may learn by listening? We got auditorial learners, and we got visual learners,
Right.
and
Exactly.
we got the hands-on learners, and then we have a combination of both. I was more of a hands-on visual type of learner. If I see something being done several times, nine times out of 10, I'm going to get it. But if someone, spelling out instructions may take me a little longer, to get it. Like, for example, if someone, if someone is giving me directions somewhere, I kind of have to have I need to know the details. Where what's the street name, or give me a landmark or something like that. And so oftentimes when I give directions, I often find myself being like really detailed. I tell them what streets it may be on if I know it, or give them like a landmark or something like that. So I would say that I'm a combination of visual and just doing it. Again, if I see someone doing something a couple of times, I'll get it.
Right. We're the same that way, Keith. I'm a visual learner and I love hands-on learning as well. So how do my books reflect different learning styles? Well, books are, books, because they're books, are visual. And whether you're reading the words or looking at the pictures or the photographs in my books, some of my books are illustrated with illustrations and some are with photographs. And then some of the books, like I said, they have QR codes in them. So that is a piece of the book that stimulates both auditory and visual learning and kind of is an extension of the book itself. But in addition, for those children who might be homeschooled, or for teachers listening to the program, all of my books have curriculum guides with them that include hands-on science activities. They include cultural and social studies activities, writing activities, to kind of dive into the book a little bit further and make it more relatable to the children. So that's how I approach it. I also have book trailers for each one of my books, and the teachers that I've spoken with like to show those book trailers to the students before they start reading the book, or after the book has been read to the kids. So they use those tools in a variety of different ways. And again, it depends on the learners in their classroom or the parents who are using those tools. It depends on how their children learn at home.
How long have you been fascinated with science and nature?
Oh, wow, forever.
And,
I
and
was,
that,
I
did
mean, I
that
was an
kind of
outdoor
have,
kid. I lived outdoors, mostly because my mother kept shooing us out the door, but I lived outdoors, and my dad and I had a garden together, and I helped my mom with her flower garden. I planted trees all around our house with my parents. My dad had a very small sailboat, and we would go out sailing as many weekends as we possibly could. We always went to the beach whenever we were near there. We hiked, we fished, we camped, we were outdoors. And just the natural world just fascinates me, the cycles that it goes through, the changes. And now that I'm an adult, the way that we're connected to it, nature and human beings have an inextricable connection. And I find that that's compelling for me. It continues to be compelling because I have more books coming out that talk about that connection in yet other ways.
I think a lot of kids was like outdoor kids per se, back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, especially during the summer where you're out of school, your parents really don't want to be bothered with you, so they put you out
Right.
and okay, you can, and we're like outside all day, and then we come in the house when the lights come on.
Yeah, exactly. Or, I mean, can't you remember squatting down and looking under a rock, or looking to see what's swimming in a little puddle of water or a little stream? or collecting leaves. I remember I used to collect leaves for a friend who lived in Florida, and they didn't have the 4 seasons like we did. I grew up in Vermont, so the trees always changed beautiful colors, and we would try to identify the leaves, the tree by the leaves, and we would examine what colors the tree changed each season. And there's just an endless source of entertainment outside.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I remember during the summers is that I was like really fascinated with lightning bugs.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to know, how do they light up? And so
Right.
we
Didn't you try to capture them and see if you could make them light up and
absolutely,
see what kind of
absolutely,
glow they cast? Did they really light up the night? Or, if you were in a closet with a lightning bug, how light could you get that closet to be?
absolutely.
Right.
Been there, done that. Been to a lot of parts.
But that's a
When
child doing science. That sort of self-directed inquiry is science. And that's, if you talk to any scientist today, that's pretty much how they got started. They asked questions. And I think that one of the best things we can do for kids is encourage that questioning and not make every moment of every day so scheduled and regimented. Give them some free time to just noodle around and get outside and explore.
do you think that that's like really going on today, being that parents have a lot of safety concerns? Today we don't get a lot of that today than it was when we was children.
Right. I think not that we weren't safety conscious then, but we didn't necessarily have the same kind of worries. And I get it. I wouldn't let my child go out to a creek and explore on her own. But if a creek is nearby, take the child there and just don't say anything. Just let her explore. Just let her lift rocks. Let her get dirty. I'm all for letting kids get dirty.
Now
Um,
that's a parent's worst nightmare, because that means more laundry.
well, I know, but think about all the wonderful things it's doing for your child.
And what about
Childhood is the
making
time to
mud?
be inquisitive and curious and just make sense of your world and try to find connections to it. I know when I was in school, the things that I remembered the most were the things that were connected to my life. That I could actually make this is learning about, I don't know, I can't think of one example right now, but learning about something in biology class in high school, for instance, made me understand something that was happening in my own life, whether it was with my parents or a sick relative or the way my own body was developing or whatever. It just, if I could make a connection to something that was happening in my house, on my street, in my neighborhood, I remembered it.
You mentioned something about, if you, I think you have mentioned something about being an activist. So, what type of activist activities are you engaged in these days? Or what have you done in
I
the past?
I am all about getting children connected to the environment, as I said, but also making changes to their habits and trying to help their parents see the wisdom of some of these changes. And I always say to kids, you don't have to do everything because that's overwhelming, but try to do something. So try to not use plastic bags at the grocery store or Walmart or Target or any of those other kinds of department stores. Bring your own bags. Or if that doesn't suit you, try to eliminate plastic in some other fashion. Maybe you want to use the toothpaste bits that you chew instead of buying plastic tubes of toothpaste. Maybe you live close enough to school and you say to your parents, will you walk me to school instead of driving me to school? Or am I old enough now to ride my bike to school? Maybe you start a green team or a blue crew at school, and you begin composting, or you start a school garden, or you go waste free for an entire year, or maybe you bring zero waste lunches to school, so you're not adding to the waste problem. Maybe you talk with your principal in the cafeteria about getting rid of those plastic utensils and any plastic packaging, and turn your school cafeteria into a zero waste cafeteria. So there are lots of things that kids can do. And the way I spread that activism is to encourage kids to recognize the power of their voices. They have the power to make changes at home. If they understand, if they put in the work and understand the problem and come up with a solution that their families can live with, they can be the agents of change.
So this is definitely a different type of activism, because when I first got into it, when I hear someone being an activist, that means that they're speaking out at a government building and they got a microphone, or they're
Yeah, I'm
marching,
not much
or
of a
they're
marcher,
or
so
they're protesting,
right.
or they chain themselves to a door or something.
Right. I'm not at that level, I guess, or that sort of activism is not for me. I prefer to go behind the scenes and quietly make changes where I can, with teachers, with students with students who can make changes in their families, with teachers, librarians, and other educators who can make changes in their classrooms or initiate changes in their schools. That's where I work most.
Some of the ideals that you have mentioned earlier, how can some of these things be implemented in school?
Well,
Before
let's
before you answer that, let me point out that this whole thing about the environment and social justice has been so politicized that not everyone is being acceptive of what's really going on. So in some school districts, you may have a difficult time bringing these types of things, where in other school districts in some states that it may be easier to do so. So where is the balance in that, and how can we get politics out of these issues?
Well, I think that's where children have the strength. They're not coming at it from a political point of view. They're coming at it from, we're connected to the earth. I want to protect the earth. So they're not interested in politics. Politics is oftentimes above them, and beyond them. But I think what has to happen is that any child who, for instance, it wants to start a green team at school, which is a group of like-minded students, possibly with faculty supervision of a faculty leader who can help direct them and ask appropriate questions. They come together and they talk about what they can manage. And maybe it's simply something in the classroom. Our classroom has decided to go zero waste. We are not going to bring anything that has to be thrown out, or if it does have to be thrown out, it's going to be a very tiny little amount. But what has to happen then is that the children have to figure out what's going to work in the culture of their school, in the culture of their families. I don't I don't know all those children. I don't know all those schools. So you have to tread delicately. You have to tread lightly. You have to make it a consensual decision, not an edict, right? You don't want to order people to do this, but you want to come to a consensus that most people can live with. And if you can be a success at that one thing, just that one thing, you realize, man, that was easy. Can we add this second thing to it? And then it starts to snowball. So saving the earth, as much as climate change is a huge problem right now, saving the earth is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's something that has to be understood and internalized and approached from a step by step by step process. And we have to be patient. We have to be patient with one another. We have to be patient with what we feel we can get accomplished reasonably in a certain amount of time. So that's why goal setting is important. And having children set goals that they can manage, maybe within a school year or within a semester or a quarter or a week. So we have to help children set these goals. And I'm not saying that everybody will agree with what I'm saying, but wouldn't it be nice to have a group of students who are environmentally inclined in every school in America, where they can slowly start to change the habits that surround them?
That would be fantastic.
It
Do
would be
you think
fantastic.
that in this case that young people would become our greatest advocate for environmental justice?
They already are. If you look at Greta Thunberg and some of the other kids, where she started this protesting on Fridays. And I'm not saying to kids skip school and go protest. I'm saying make a change in your own life. Let's start at home. Let's start in your community. And I think that once you start, you realize it's not so hard to break some of these habits at all. It's not so hard to reduce your single-use plastic consumption. It's not so hard to consider the earth when you're making changes in your city or town. It's not so hard to ask a candidate running for elected office, what are your views on the environment, and how important is that to you, and how are you going to impact it if you're elected? There are a lot of kids that are doing that right now. My books are full of them. Kids that are getting out there and making a change, being the voice of change. And I find that when I read about those students, and when my readers read about those students, they are inspired and they receive a certain measure of hope from some of these pretty gloomy headlines, right? We have the environment is nothing but gloomy headlines. But if you read about somebody who is doing something and being successful at what they're doing, it gives you the hope that maybe you can try something similar.
Here in mostly southern states, Gulf South states, we have a collaboration of organizations that have gathered together. You have states like Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and Puerto Rico, and we call ourselves Gulf South for a Green New Deal. So it's a
Wonderful.
whole collective of organizations. It's been in existence probably like 4 or 5 years. I joined in 2021, I believe, or 2022, something like that. So I haven't been a part of it law. I don't consider myself to be an environmentalist, but it was a or anything remotely environmental, but I have learned a lot.
Well, kudos to you. That's excellent. I think it's wonderful. And I think it also proves that there are people who think like you no matter where you are. So find those people and start lifting your voice.
That I definitely have been doing since being part of this conglomerate. I have met lots of people that have been doing this work much longer than I have, and I glean from them. And it's a funny thing. They recruited me because of my strong voice in local affairs. But I was like, well, I don't know anything about environmental justice. None of that. I was like, well, you know what? Don't worry about that. You'll get it as time goes on. But but we need your voice. And so that's how I was. So that's how I came into that type of work. And I'm still learning, but I'm growing.
That's all we can ask, right? We all do our best. We all learn something new every day. We all grow. We all change our world for a better place.
And it's more just policy and getting the word out more so than anything else. Uh, Other things will probably change as time goes on. But for now, I think this is the lane that I feel most comfortable in until, maybe, I don't know, 5, 10 years from now, people will think of me as an environmentalist. But right now, I'm still in the wilderness. as, you know, still in the wilderness.
But
So
you're there. But you're
it
there. So
mhm.
and you're learning and you're growing and you're spreading the awareness. And that's all we're asking, is that people become more aware of how they are connected to nature and how nature affects everything that we do, our weather, the temperature in our towns and cities, what our rivers look like, how much garbage is flowing on our up on our beaches, um, all these kinds of things that for so long we've sort of turned a blind eye, and now it's starting to catch up with us. And I would just like to say to children that you have the power to change this and we need your help.
Do you think the mainstream media is kind of like downplaying this whole thing about environmental justice?
Well, I boy, that's another whole discussion, Keith. I think that mainstream media airs, broadcasts, writes about what will sell papers or glue viewers to the screen. And maybe some topics that they choose not to discuss or cover very much just aren't, what's the word I'm looking for? Just aren't
They
compelling
believe
enough for them
they're
to keep
not
viewers
appealing.
glued to the TV or keep viewers reading, rather than flipping to the next thing on the list. But I think that the more successes we have and the more changes we can make in terms of making life positive for larger groups of people, making neighborhoods a lovely place to be and breathe and live, and the water is clean, that what happens is those people vote. The children that read my books, they grow up and they vote. And I think that's ultimately how we're going to make changes, regardless of what mainstream media says.
Have you been on? Have you been on several podcasts uh in the past? Reason why I'm asking is because podcasting has become so significantly important in the last 10 years because in podcasting, we're really not afraid to go after people, calling people out, making issues a light. We like to talk about those things, and I think that we're beginning to see more people turning off mainstream media and going to podcasting because we're not afraid to talk about things that people really need to hear, rather than having that twitching ear.
Right,
And
right.
and and
I've been
and
on a few
we
podcasts
have like,
before, but I think you're totally right. I think people are veering away from mainstream media. I mean, the 24-hour news cycle is probably the worst thing that ever happened to us, and that stories are repeated and repeated and repeated over and over and over until the next news cycle. And then the same thing happens again. So, if you watch mainstream media for 15 minutes, you've pretty much got the news for the day. But
yes.
people are craving other in-depth reporting, where once so many newspapers have folded, our neighborhood newspapers, where once we had investigative in-depth reporting, we don't have that anymore. And I
Mhm.
think podcasting there are many podcasts that are starting to fill that niche because they dive deeper into an issue and are willing to ask questions that maybe don't fit into a soundbite.
And also in the next couple of weeks here in Alabama, we're getting ready to do the reenactment of the march from Selma to Montgomery and in Selma. And there was recently a big storm that came through and kind of sliced the town in half. But they said, well, we're going to have it anyway. And so the Australia broadcast section, we're going to cover, we're going to cover as many events as we possibly can, because the will of the people said, we want this to continue. We don't want this piece of history to die.
Mhm.
Despite all of the damage that they have, they're going to continue to have that reenactment, and we're going to be covering that. Of course, I think this one is going to be so significant, uh, simply because something similar to what happened in 9/11, uh, when the country was shut down. And it was like, wait a minute, we're not going to let the terrorists win and allow the country to shut down. And so we're going to continue to live our lives. We're going to be bigger and better than ever. And that's what happened. And I think that's
Mhm.
what's happening is going to happen in this case. And there's always this national prominence where we have people from all over the country that come to be a part of that celebration.
Oh, that's
And
wonderful.
we're going to cover that live. Just to give an example of what um, you're saying. It's not necessarily for ratings. It's more to empower and inspire
Mhm.
people, to really know what happened. Hopefully they'll be aware of what happened. History is not always pleasant.
No, it isn't. But it's important to remember.
Mhm. And so with podcasting, the reason why I say this is because that's what podcasting does. It captured all of those type of things. It really is. You got some podcasts that are entertained, but not in a way that you look at TV today. But it's also educational, enlightening, and inspiring.
Mhm.
And it's different. That's why people flock to podcasts. And we're seeing, like, back in the day, back in the day, in my day, you never, hear the term reality TV. I was like, what's that? Never heard of anything like that.
Right. That's a relatively new term.
But it's not really reality TV. It's just people, do things to kind of that to me is stage for rating.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Okay. We are over our time, and so we're going to close with a couple of more questions. First of all, how are people able to locate you?
How are people able to? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Locate you?
Locate me. Oh, okay. You can
Like for
find me
example,
on the web at patriciamnewman.com, patriciamnewman.com. And I'm also on Twitter at Patricia Newman. I'm on Instagram at Patricia Newman Books. So drop me a line. Let me know what you thought.
are do you still go to schools throughout California, or basically where you live?
I will visit any school in the nation. I will visit any school that invites me to come. I have 2 California visits coming up very soon, but I will be in Texas in April visiting with librarians there at their annual conference. So I'm looking forward to that.
And finally, we have this tradition at the Australian broadcast section to where our guests get to have the last word.
Oh, your guests get to have the last word.
Yes.
What would that
It
be?
could be absolutely anything. Doesn't necessarily have to be related to the topic at hand. It can be anything.
Well, I would like to encourage your listeners out there to consider nonfiction books for the children in their lives, particularly environmental nonfiction, particularly my books, if you haven't already. But nonfiction it's the wave of the future for children, for schools, for learning, for engaging. Help your child become curious about the world.
Very well said. We want to thank you for being part of the program today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to be a part of us today. Certainly a wealth of information. And I hope that our viewers and listeners will take heed of what's being said. Hope they'll be able to contact you. You find some more people, build up your audience, and really share information in a way that is relatable. We'll be able to understand, and hopefully it'll motivate us to make a change.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And that would do it for us here on the Author Showcase. Again, I'm Keith Williams, your host. This is the place where if you are a book author, a publisher, a blogger, a musician, this is your opportunity to shine. It's kind of like your 15 minutes of fame per se. This is where you become famous. So until then, we thank you for being part of us, and we'll see you next week.